Hello and welcome to polyplane.com. Today we're going to be talking about the differences between numeric modeling and arbitrary modeling. So before I get into telling you what the differences are between modeling numerically and modeling arbitrarily, I'd rather just show you. And I'm going to do this in a couple of ways. I'm going to do a Photoshop example, and then I'm going to show you a couple models that were built in Rhino that both are either numeric or arbitrarily modeled. And so it'll give you a little bit of a better idea of what we're talking about here. So in Photoshop, this can be clearly illustrated by just drawing out lines with the grid snap turned on. And I'm just going to draw a line going from 2 to the 6-inch mark. And I'm just going to do that a few times. And thankfully, with the grid snap turned on, I know that this is going to come out nice and even and perfect each time because the snaps are on. I've got Shift held down to give me straight lines. And you can see that it's giving me a very predictable constraint. Now, if I try to do this over here where I have grid snap turned off and there's no snaps, and I'm just gonna, draw these out. Now, it's much looser and quicker, and it's probably a little bit inaccurate, but, I can then take the marquee tool over here and select what I don't want and just delete it and, get pretty close to the same result. But if I turn off the grid on this one, you can clearly see that those lines are much straighter and more precise. So there's a little bit of a difference going on. In the modeling space, this works a little bit differently. Here on the left side of the screen, I can't tell you exactly what this is, but I can tell you that it does have some very specific constraints, some hardware components inside of it that need to be at a certain dimension, otherwise the thing won't work. So you can tell that's kind of a micro USB thing, and there's some standoffs, and this piece right here represents a circuit board, and this has been highly engineered, but it started out as a very conceptual thing that constraints were then applied to it, modeled around. On the right side of my screen is a robot that is just loosely modeled. There were no dimensional constraints, and you can't really tell what the scale is on this thing. If I were to put some of the environment back in, you'd be able to see it's like 30 stories tall, but thankfully for us, numbers don't really matter in the computer outside of just giving us some sort of scale. And this was modeled over an 8-hour day, if that, and really kind of came together much quicker because I wasn't dealing with actual physical constraints. I was dealing with whatever my imagination could come up with. So, there's a lot of repeated shapes, like all the joints and the shoulders and the fingers are the same, the legs and arms are the same. So it becomes much quicker and I can really focus on the form. And this was based on an underlay drawing that I just kind of modeled over the top of and loosely came up with something. So you can see sort of how you can still, even though it's arbitrarily modeled, it still is highly dynamic. Likewise, the one that's more defined by variables, it starts to stiffen up a little bit as towards what it is. And although it came from something that was highly conceptual, it's now very well defined as to what is what and how everything fits together. Now that I've shown you what numeric and arbitrary modeling looks like, let's just go over the hit list of what these things are and what makes them beneficial and what's kind of a drawback of each. The benefits of numeric modeling include defined measurements, better and easier scale integration from model to model, and typically they're informed by a set of clear constraints. Working arbitrarily leads to getting things done a little bit quicker, working in a looser fashion, and working arbitrarily tends to be a little more conceptual. Some of the drawbacks of numeric modeling include a slower work process, and it's not as good for conceptual work as there's less room for interpretation. A few of the drawbacks of modeling arbitrarily include that it's a little harder to maintain scale in a model that doesn't really have any sort of spatial constraints, and sizing is dictated on other things in your model or your scene. And it's a little less accurate than when you're modeling numerically. I've seen models that have had a great blend between numeric modeling and arbitrary modeling, and I would say that these probably have the healthiest blend of conceptual design with really well-informed look and feel. Just keep that in mind. This isn't so much a this or that so much as a balancing act. I hope this gives you a better idea of the differences between numeric and arbitrary modeling. Thanks so much for coming by, guys. Have a great day.